As I've grown older, I found that I wanted to find a job in genetics and use that in order to benefit the world. But there's always a doubt sitting in the back of my mind that my work will never really change the world, and that if I do ever get to that position, it won't really matter. And when that doubt really does exist in my mind and it's really focusing it on me, I always find myself turning back to a very specific movie. My name is Christopher Wytunick, and today I'm going to be talking about the Pixar film Ratatouille and why I consider Ratatouille to be Pixar's most important film. Now, while Ratatouille might not be Pixar's most grossing film that they've ever made, and although I personally find The Incredibles to be my favorite movie that they've ever created, even better than Ratatouille, Ratatouille itself is Pixar's most important work in terms of the story and what it really means to me. I've done a lot of research when it comes to this film and its production, along with the story. Not just research as well. I've also watched this film plenty of times, so I know a good bit when it comes to the story of this film. Now, because we're talking about a film that's about an hour to an hour and a half long, kind of breaking it down to every specific point would take a really long time, so I won't be doing that. Instead, I'm going to primarily focus on the story of the film and how it's built, the main plot points and events that exist in there that really make it so important, and finally, I want to focus on the art direction and the sound design that really sort of make this film what it really is. So first, we'll start off with the story of the film, how it's kind of built for me. And I feel like Ratatouille distances itself from most of the Pixar films and a lot of animation that's created, being that the film is not created for children when it was being made. It's basically made for all. Um, Now, when I kind of bring this up, when people talk about animation, they often basis it as a genre, as the animation genre. Animation, in my own opinion, and what you should understand, is that animation is not a genre. Animation is instead can be considered as an art form. Animation can do tons of different forms of genre. It can do horror, it can do a western, it can do comedy, it can do a romance, but it's not a specific genre. It's not focused on one type. And a lot of people feel like animation is a genre because the majority of it focuses a lot on the younger generation. It focuses on kids when creating stuff like that. A lot of people, when they think of animation, they immediately go to kids shows, stuff like SpongeBob and just basic animation for kids shows. But unlike that, animation has the ability to be so much more diverse, and you can really see that in this film and how it was created. Um, a good example like that I can bring up off the top of my head would be the beginning of this film. Um, right in the beginning, you can see the color tones and the atmosphere of this movie. A lot of Pixar films are usually bright and impactful in the beginning, like Monsters Inc. or The Incredibles, like I mentioned earlier, with bright music, colors. But unlike that, in Ratatouille, it's a much more mellow and not so dramatic opening. And you can see as the story progresses further and Remy loses himself from his family, and you'll find that the color tones and the atmosphere of the story is so dark and depressing within the first like 30 minutes of the story. You can just see just how much of a contrast this is compared to other movies like The Incredibles. And on top of just the general atmosphere of the movie, there's a lot more adult like themes and that you can see within this film. Some good examples of that would include like the actual chefs that you'll find in Gusteau's restaurant. I'm assuming that people have watched this film. This is a pretty well-known film. It's been out for quite many years, so assuming that most people have watched this film. In Gusteau's restaurant, we're all introduced to the different chefs that are in there. They're all minor characters, but there's just a brief bit of dialogue on each of them. But for example, I mean, one of the chefs, it was said that he quote unquote fooled around with a ringmaster's daughter. I mean, we're all adults, we kind of know what that means. And there's another character who, Colette, and one of the chefs, who's discussing to the main character, Linguini, that he used to run guns for the resistance. So you can see there's a lot more adult themes. Another one would be the amount of wine in this film, being that it's a kids film, and the amount of wine being drank. I mean, there's the scene with Linguini and Skinner getting drunk off of wine and talking about the restaurant and Linguini's future. So there's a lot more adult themes in this film compared to other things like The Incredibles or Monsters Inc. Better yet would probably be a good example. Um, so while focusing on this adult theme might seem like a pretty small part, I think it's pretty important because it shows how different Ratatouille is compared to the sort of kids animation that Pixar and Disney are really known for, and I think Brad Bird really does amazing work with this. He's the director of this film. He really puts in great work when it comes to creating films like these because he doesn't base his films around just making them for kids. He wants to include everyone, being either there's the atmosphere, certain parts of the story, or just the entire story in itself, the main plot points, which is what I'd like to now go on to. So now we're going to start moving on to the meat and potatoes of this speech, which is going to be the main plot point of the film. So the focus of Ratatouille, the main focus of it, I find can be interpreted far beyond the kitchen. If you remember, if you've watched this film, pretty early on when Remy makes a delicious soup, we hear Colette talking to Skinner, and she says the main thoughts of Gusteau being that anyone can cook. This line has such incredible importance when it's introduced because it removes Remy's own doubts about himself from the beginning of the film, where he's doesn't feel because everyone tells him that he can't cook, he can't do great things with food because he's a rat like that. But hearing Colette say that, and from Gusteau's words, he can cook. It basically proves that to himself that he can cook. And while it feels like the film could just end there with Remy's dreams being kind of realized and kind of pushed forward that he can cook, it's sort of elevated and pushed forward through his manipulation of Linguini and his ability to cook through him, and how Linguini is effectively gaining all the fame and recognition from this cooking when it's really Remy the one doing all the work. And of course, however, every story needs a villain. We haven't really been introduced to this villain yet, and then he gets introduced about halfway through. We meet Anton Ego, who is pretty much the antithesis of Gusteau and the thought that anyone can cook. He believes that not just anyone can cook, only very certain people can cook. You have to be born to do it. However, when Anton later comes to Gusteau's restaurant after hearing all the success from Linguini and the revitalization of the restaurant, and he's served ratatouille, which is essentially what, in terms of Colette says, a peasant's dish, he's blown away, and he's brought back to his childhood, where he originally found his love and his joy for fine cuisine and good food. And through that action, he ends up dropping his pen. And think about what that means in terms of the story. Ego is a critic. His work derives around critiquing and specifically destroying other restaurants through bad critique, because it's fun to read and fun to write. However, here, he's tasted food so good that he ends up dropping his pen, the item of his power and his strength. And he ends up enjoying the food for the first time in who knows how long. And after he enjoys this food, Ego is later introduced to Remy and how the process of cooking the food works. And we later hear his speech, or not his speech, sorry, I'm so sorry, I just blanked right now. His critique of Gusteau's. Sorry about that. And in his critique of Gusteau's, Anton really elevates on that original thought that anyone can cook. He understands that what Gusteau meant by that was that not anyone can cook. Not everyone's destined to be able to cook, but a great cook can come from anywhere. Now, while this kind of goes against what originally the thought is that anyone can cook, I feel like it's a much more mature and understandable thought that anybody has the ability to do great things. Anybody has the ability to kind of take it to the next level and be the best. And they can come from any sort of background. It doesn't really matter where they're from, what their life was like beforehand. However, it also needs to be understood that there will always be those that are better. That there will always be those who are able to elevate it further than you or than somebody else. So understand you need to be humble in that sense that there will always be people who are better. Never the best. Finally, because I didn't realize how long this speech is getting, we're about 9 minutes in. I'm just going to briefly discuss on the art and the sound design so that we can conclude and wrap this up. I'd rather not push past 10 minutes or 11 or 12. The art design and the sound in this movie is incredible. Just thinking on the parts about Ego in the end when he drops his pen and he's brought back into the reality to remember that food. The sound and the colors of the food his mom serves and the ratatouille, it really brings that scene to life with all that color and beauty, especially on the countryside when he's brought back to his sort of upbringing. Another great scene, personally, one that sticks with me the most, is definitely when Remy's lost after his family and finally sees Paris for the first time. He's in the darkest pits available. The actual color and atmosphere of the movie is darker than it's ever been. And yet, as he begins to climb and go up into onto the roofs, the colors brighten up and become more glorious to the point where he sees Paris, and the colors and the golden glory of that city are just extraordinary. And the score of that scene is just off the charts. It's honestly one of my favorite scenes of all time when it comes to this film. Um, it also needs to be made sure important. The voice actors of both Remy and Linguini were incredible. Patton Oswalt was the voice of Remy. He does incredible work for the minor speaking points he does have in the film because of the split diverse between their two speech between Linguini and Remy. And then on top of that, the voice of Linguini being Lou Romano was incredible. Lou Romano is actually a animator for Pixar. He works on this film, but he's also an incredible voice actor and did an excellent job as Linguini. Now, let's conclude this up because we're pushing already to 11 minutes. I wouldn't consider, like I said earlier, I wouldn't consider this my favorite animated film of all time. Incredibles is definitely better, and I have certain plot discrepancies with this film. There's certain things I have issues, of course, that exist in every film, but Ratatouille is just, it's more important to me than all of Pixar's lineup combined. Um, I just feel like this film isn't as really well appreciated and known as other films. Thankfully, though, as time has passed, this movie's really been able to kind of get its spot in the limelight and really start to be discovered by people. Different music and things from the actual film being shown and discussed through media has really brought this movie back into the limelight where it should be viewed and enjoyed by all. And in my eyes, personally, I would consider Ratatouille to be one of the most important films to me in terms of my own growth and hopefully pushing forward in the future. Thank you so much for watching my speech. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for the long time. Thank you so much. Have a good one. Bye-bye.